episode of the Quill Podcast. And here we are on this very first episode. It's been a while since I've done a live stream. It's currently 12 a.m. here in Romania, and this podcast is gonna be quite interesting. Uh, and if you didn't know, I'm Romanian. I live in Romania. I live literally in an old, like, communist made uh, apartment building, and I live quite almost literally across the street from where my grandfather lived. My grandfather lived for like 75 years almost, something like that. And he he had an interesting life. He was born on in the year 1935, and uh, he had such an interesting and such a riveting life, being born like in a one of the close to the one of the biggest cities uh, in Romania, being Cluj-Napoca, or Kolozsváros. If you were to know any Hungarian people, that's what they would call it, or it's called something else in German, for example. So everyone has kind of their name for it. So uh, let me show you the images. If you're watching live on Twitch, thank you. If you're watching on YouTube, also thank you. Don't forget to subscribe and all that. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Himalaya, Anchor, Spotify, wherever, thank you for listening. And always live, like, rate, whatever you have to do, and share it, and hope it's gonna be interesting. The pictures you see, the video you see on loop here, it's actually of Romanian peasants here in Cluj working on something in the 1930s. So I found quite a bit of footage, and I'm gonna give you, first of all, I'm gonna give you a context, where Romania was in the 1930s, what was going on in the country and in Europe, kind of like a context before, getting into the actual story. So let's jump into it, because we have quite a long way to go, like over an hour. Good. So this is Romania. Romania is in Europe. Oh, there you go. Closer. If you're watching, you'll have a map. We're neighbors with the Republic of Moldova, with Bulgaria, with Hungary. We're like in a very very cozy spot next to the Black Sea. So, and we're technically one of the biggest countries in Europe, like both size and population. But many Romanians like ran away and emigrated, especially after the EU and stuff like that. But anyway, yes, this is current Romania, and this is the Romania we're gonna talk about this episode, to be more precise. And at the time my grandfather was born in 1935, there was a lot of tension in Europe, and there was a lot going on, especially with the rise of Adolf Hitler, and just the whole little thing of a world war coming about and stuff like that. Besides, in that period of time, Romania was a kingdom, so he had a king in Carol II, which was crowned in 1930. So this is how it's gonna work. Just so you know, I have a bunch of stuff here about his life and years, and you know, just a bunch of things, and I'm gonna look through them, and we're gonna piece his life basically through that, and minute by minute and year by year, we're just gonna go through his life, because my grandfather died like 2 or 3 years ago now, and I just think he had such an interesting life. Even if he didn't yearn for it, he was just born in that period where by the end of the World War he was 10. So you know, it's something. Um, it's something being, and you know, living nowadays, and or during the communist era, and living, you know, during a world war, which is still something mind-boggling for me, you know, because it is, you can't really uh, like hide from that. So yeah, let's let's keep this rolling. And yeah, as I was saying, in Romania, the in the year 1935, the National Christian Party, the fascist party, kind of took um, birth, and it's very important. We're gonna go to like 1939 and stop there for at least this episode. Don't worry, I'm not gonna try to prolong this very much. So to show you on the map where my grandfather was born, he was born in a city called Cluj, but he was born right next to it, which is the interesting part, because that means he was born as a peasant. And if you didn't know, most of the country by that point, outside of a few cities, was very much like peasant driven and countryside driven, having not having a lot of industries and a lot of, you know, technological advancements like others had at that time. So it, it was something very, very interesting, especially considering that Romania came in the 1930s, was right after the Great Depression, which hit here too. So you know, you learn something new kind of every day. And you know, being born in the 1930s, it was quite peaceful, it was quite interesting, and I want to show you a few things. Like there are a few videos of Romania being represented in the world, and I want you to see how we were seen at that moment. Like here's a video from 1935 from an American company, and I'm probably gonna try to shut up during it.
Everybody knows His Majesty King Carol II, the present ruler of Romania. He is fortunate to have Romania to rule, as it is one of the most beautiful countries in southern Europe. With him is his brother, Prince Nicholas, and his son, Crown Prince Michael, once a king himself before the return of his father. King Carol loves to drive the high-powered Hispano-Suiza himself, and now he leaves Hunedoara for a long stretch to his castle in Sinaia, romantically located in the Carpathian Mountains, one of Romania's cities renowned for its charm and beauty. You will find many roads like this one in Sinaia. They are cut right through an old pine forest, which today, however, is a national park. There are such roads leading to mountaintops from where the view is absolutely unforgettable.
It is unforgettable, honestly.
Like in fairy tales, this road brings you to the charming castle Peleș, the favorite summer and winter residence of the Romanian royal family.
Oh, if you could
The
only
Peleș
see
Castle was
what
built in 1887 by Romania's first king,
ruins Peleș
Carol
is
I,
right now.
who was crowned in 1881 in Bucharest after the declaration of Romania's independence, which took place in 1877. In this splendid castle, there are many outstanding paintings, classics, and the works of modern artists. A great amount of the sculptured furniture is the artwork of the old King Carol I, who was renowned for his hobby. The style of this architecture is Swiss throughout, with the exception of the statues in the garden, which are of French origin. On July 20th, 1927, King Ferdinand I, the actual king's father, passed away in this castle after a long illness. Not far from the royal summer palace we have just seen is Sinaia's monastery with its bell tower, from where were shouted warnings against aerial attacks during the World War. This magnificent monastery's cathedral, an example of typical Romanian architecture, is the work of many artists who spent years to complete it. Inside, there are religious paintings on the walls and ceiling, beautifying this holy church where people come from far and near to pray for peace and happiness.
This didn't really change even now. That's kind of the same thing now. People taking pilgrimages.
Almost
to
all houses in
different
Sinaia bear the stamp of
monasteries.
Romanian architectural style, original in itself, and copied in other countries for its beauty. Modernistic touches can also be found in this house recently built, making it so much more outstanding when you consider this small type of mountain house.
We destroyed this. We don't have urbanism planning and stuff like that. So people started building willy-nilly wherever they felt like, buildings and villas and hotels and stuff like that.
If you venture into this
and they
majestic
just
casino where
ruined it.
chemin de fer and roulette games will give you plenty of thrill.
And they ruined buildings like this,
And inside the
either
casino
the
there is
Communist
also a nice
Party
theater,
or afterwards by
an
people
American
not
bar,
taking care of
a
it.
library, and other attractions to make it enjoyable for any visitor who would come to Sinaia, either in
Because I know, for example, Ceausescu loved picture places like that. So yeah, that's just kind of one of the video, one of the videos. Another one I have here. Let me change it back to the people working here, and just stop it for a second because I have another one here. This is from 1939, and actually no, let me show you Bucharest first, and how people saw it, because it wasn't just Sinaia, it was quite more than that. And Bucharest was known as Little Paris, the little Paris in the east, basically. And this is a German video montage documentary thing, and it's just so interesting to see how it was back then and how it is right now. This is all just to give you kind of a little bit of a context, and what exactly is happening. Because if you go right now to Bucharest, you're not gonna see this. You're not gonna see wide, nice boulevards, and you won't really see the nice roads and class and stuff like that, because a lot of roads and stuff, and places were both ruined, both by the current administration and by the Communist Party. Like Ceausescu wanted to remove so much of what was Romania's past and to not have be reminded by what was, because you know, you don't want people to be nostalgic after, you know, having a king, or you know, what was back then and what it is now, especially due to the conditions that he created. Yeah. So, you know, if you go to Bucharest, I'll go to Bucharest actually in about 2 weeks or so, and if you want me, I'll vlog and I'll go show you some of the most beautiful places and the most amazing like architecture that you can still find, because much of it was sadly ruined because either people didn't take care of it after the 1990s, or you know, Ceausescu in his madness to like refurnish basically Bucharest and make it into his vision, just tore down building after building after building. And you know, yeah, this is the video about Bucharest. Now let's go into 1939 to kind of show you where, even with a king, this is kind of the stance of Romania and where it had its head at politically speaking, because the king was very much despised after a while, especially during the later years. So, you know, let me show you.
Vor der Kaserne, vor dem großen Tor, steht ne Laterne und steht sie noch davor. Dort wollen wir uns wiedersehen, bei der Laterne wollen wir stehen, wie einst Lili Marleen, wie einst Lili Marleen. Unsere beiden Schatten sahen wie ein aus, dass wir lieb uns hatten, das sah man gleich daraus. Und alle Leute sollen es sehen.
The funny thing is that as you just saw, there was a German general, you know, saluting the Nazi salute and stuff like that, and people were reciprocating. And here you see a priest actually christening planes. I'm gonna tell you, this happens now to Romania, in Romania also. This didn't change, and it went to ridiculous lengths. Like they were christening gas pipes, statues, everything they can christen, they christen, even cars. So it's just absolutely ridiculous. But as you can see, these are images from Bucharest, near Bucharest, which are quite riveting to see. You know, impressive people come here, and there's much more to this than it lets on. And here's something more, that this is what I think not many people see, and I was surprised that I found it so easily, is Romanian peasants and soldiers doing the Nazi salute in 1939. And you know, Romania kind of has a bad history with accepting what they did in World War II. They tried after the 1990s to deny their participation in the Holocaust, like 2 or 3 times now, and they were sanctioned, and they were, you know, kind of put back into their place by telling them, no, you were part of this, so don't try to deny it. But they tried again and again, and the third time they had to do a lot of stuff to make up for it. Like they have a few now Holocaust memorials and stuff like that, but they don't have actually, you know, it's not very public what they did, and it still upsets a lot of people if you want to talk about that. And the people you can talk about this mostly are either dead, or they can't just, they don't have enough proof, you know, like physical proof, because of course the Romanian government wanted to hide this, all of it. So, you know, and here you're gonna have to see some traditional Romanian dancing. And I swear to you, if you, it's like breakdancing before breakdancing. It's so interesting and weird. Anyway, yeah, if you want to see it, there's a 55-minute video. You can find it. It's interesting because it's something you don't see too often. So yeah, by this point, you know, in 1938, they declared the royal dictatorship, and there was a new constitution adopted by the end of February. So, you know, it was interesting. It was interesting because by the when my grandfather was born in 1935, that's when kind of everything started going downhill. So, you know, actually not quite really. Romania has such a complicated and stupidly complicated history that you know, you're just gonna ask, you just can't ask yourself what the fuck was going through their minds, because it wasn't much. It was either profit or, you know, nothing. So yeah, let's move on and tell you a bit about my late grandfather and his story. He was, as I said, he was born in a rural area, and at the time many Romanians would have like 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 kids, even, because that's what women did back then. They didn't have much to do, so to speak. They were just either working in the field, making food, making clothing, and taking care of, you know, animals, or they were making children. It's such a simplistic view, and you can still find that here in Romania. Like I was talking to someone. He was a history professor for 10 years, and we were talking about Romanian history and all this stuff. And I was telling him that, and we were, you know, agreeing on the fact that I live in technically the second biggest city, I think, in Romania, something like that. One of the biggest cities in Romania. And if you look here, where was it? Cluj was the 5th biggest, you know, city in Romania back then. It's weird because you can go like, you know, drive like for an hour and a half, and you're in a town, not even a town, you're in a village where things are the way they were 100 years ago. Like with the even even electricity, you know, they use it either for radio or TV, but just because the TV is colored and or HD or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're better, you know, or smarter, or just because some of them have smartphones, because they're not, because that's where they live. And sadly, especially here in Romania, we don't have the quality of life that many others might have. For example, in France, in the UK, in Holland, or places like that, where there are actually good teachers and they send their good teachers, and the quality of the education is very good. For example, my grandma, uh, the mother of my mother, only had like four classes. Also, someone that was born in the 1930s, four classes for a woman. It's nuts, but that's what reality is and was when you were, you know, from a village. If you were a woman or a boy, it didn't matter. If you didn't have like if you weren't like the priest's boy or the mayor's boy or stuff like that, where, you know, they were proud of you and stuff like that, they wouldn't push you to go to like high school or finish high school or even go to college, because why would you? You know, you're just gonna get out there and do what my father did, my father's father did: work the fields, milk the cows, get the food, have a woman, make children, live. You know, very simple, very straightforward. And that's how many people see it even now. If you look, for example, it's a perfect map. There's a perfect map here on the right, depicting the literacy rate. And if you see in Transylvania, or this part of Transylvania, kind of the middle south, it had the best, kind of the best literacy rate compared to the rest of the Romanian, that it's basically red and pink and stuff like that. And the same kind of is true now, but, you know, on a micro scale, being with many like with many, you know, villages and stuff like that, because that's just what it is, sadly. uh, so imagine that my grandfather actually managed to get to 8th grades and even high school, if I'm not mistaken, which is something. But, you know, you can imagine being born with 5 or 4 brothers, one mother, and in a poor place, in a poor time, right after the depression, where the Romanian peasant didn't have much, because they didn't have much, sadly. And, you know, it was something interesting, because you can't really fathom it today unless you live in a really war-torn country, or you have like a direct contact with those that are under the poverty line, those that are broke, those that, you know, live in certain places like that. You really don't have a grasp on what's happening. And uh, there are you can find uh, well, you can try to find, because there are out there like news reports about the poverty in Romania, especially in rural Romania, where no one gives a damn. And now imagine this situation, but like 100 years ago, or 80 years ago, where, you didn't have the technology to do what you can do now and to reach out the way you can reach out now, you know. So it's something kind of fascinating to know that my grandfather grew up not watching television, not watching, barely listening to any radio if they had radio, and you know, stuff like that. Uh, and yeah, let's keep moving because I wanna really get into the nitty gritty and stuff like that. So I showed you videos of the 1930s, 1935, and 1939 in Romania, and I showed you a few other things. So now you kind of have the context of how he lived, how people lived, especially the peasants during that time. And it's fascinating because you know when you kind of put in perspective the fact that he was born poor, like dirt poor, to a mother and four brothers or five, I don't even know how many they were, and he had to he had no grasp on what was happening, because you have to think that the newspaper barely got to rural areas, and if they got, you didn't have much choice in what you could read. So if you were fed Nazi propaganda in the 1930s, especially 1935, 1939, um, you were to believe it, right? You couldn't quite debate that it's the truth or not. If it's your only news source. The same thing is happening even today, where people isolate themselves into their own bubbles and just, live there. So imagine being born in a rural area, having your childhood be with four bigger brothers, having to learn how to kill a chicken, kill a rabbit, catch and set traps for like foxes and all sorts of pests, checking uh, for eggs, making bread, making mamaliga, and learning to do a lot of stuff and doing a lot of like actual work on the field, do some hours. You'd go to school, come home, and then go help in the garden. And it wasn't like in the small garden you have, I don't know, on your balcony or stuff like that. It was like a few thousand meters of garden where you had to cut the grass, cut the wood, plant, take care, weed the weeds out, and all that stuff. Take care of a whole. It's like taking care of a whole farm, but every house is its own farm with 5 children, 8 children, 3 children, how many children they have. Because you can imagine that in rural Romania they don't really have contraception, they don't have condoms, they don't have pills, they don't have any of that. They just, if you were pregnant, you were gonna have that baby, and there was no discussion to it. And if you didn't want to be called a whore, and I don't know, your father wasn't a doctor, or I don't know, you got raped, or you didn't have much choice in the matter. You were to marry that man, because otherwise the townsfolk would, gossip about you and call you a slut and shame you and shame your family and what a poor job your parents did raising you and all that stuff. And believe me, this still happen today, and it's so perplexing to me, this this thought, that people still kind of judge this in this manner and just go about their day like, yeah, this is normal, she's a hoe, she I can't stand that. I can't stand that, like that at all. And you know when you add religion to it, because Romania is a very religious country, they do this even now. And I saw this happen also in countries like the US, the UK, and stuff like that, where they bring in their religion, whatever it is, their Bible, their Quran, whatever. They bring in their religion into their beliefs, trying to justify it. I'm not an asshole because a certain book tells me that I'm not an asshole, and it's fucked up, and it's fucked up in a very, very big way. And it doesn't justify it, just like cheating on your girlfriend while you're drunk, or your boyfriend while you're drunk, doesn't justify it. This doesn't justify it as well. Your religion doesn't justify your actions, in my opinion, whether you think they're right or not, or you just want to be an asshole. It just doesn't work. And you can imagine the pressure that, for example, my great grandma had to deal with, having like 4 or 5 children and having to raise them, because it's a woman's job. It's a woman's job to raise children. At least that's the mentality here, in Romania. And maybe it changed maybe with this new generation, but I don't really see it much, because it's hard to spot like progress from my point of view here, because I've seen things that are not normal, and I've seen them even from actual girls and their behavior. So it's a weird thing kind of to try to figure it out, or to put it in any kind of sort of context. So I just don't know how I would have reacted if I was in his place, and I don't know how I would have developed to think honestly by just growing up in the countryside, having to do all that stuff without technology, without having to read books, without having to do everything I did, to get where I am right now. And because I look at certain people that grew up and don't have a lot of notion, like, I swear to you, I was on a bus last week and I saw a man actually eating sunflower seeds. Like sunflower seeds on a bus, public transport. And people like that don't know what museums are, because their whole life was growing up, buttfuck nowhere, and suddenly they found themselves in a place they didn't ask to be. And it's something unreal that's hard to kind of wrap your head around, especially trying to put yourself into the shoes of those people. So, you know, uh, it's interesting. Interesting. So let's start again. 1935, Hitler violates the Treaty of Versailles in Europe. German Gestapo is placed above the law, and Mussolini forces to take Ethiopia. This is already 1936. Civil war in Spain, and you know, it's the craziness has already started, and Stalin starts a purge in 1937 of the Red Army generals. Hitler reveals war plans during Hossbach conference, and you know, fun stuff, a lot of fun stuff. And on the Romanian side, the fascist party begins, as I said. They make a pact with the Communist Party, royal dictatorship in 1938, and in 1939 a whole bunch of stuff starts to happen, like the fact that the Soviets have an interest in Bessarabia, for example, which is very, very interesting. And also in 1931, Germany invades Poland and the start of World War II happens. Then one of the army generals was assassinated by the Iron Guard legionnaires, starting a sort of coup in Romania. And it's absolutely fascinating to see in what kind of world he had to grow up, you know, and in what kind of a place he grew up to, because everything I showed you about the peasant and how Romania was just a very, very weird paradox of kind of beauty in having like Sinaia, Bucharest and stuff like that, and having, you know, the rest, which was just horrible places without any water or without electricity, and you know, gas pipes and all that stuff that is necessary for us, or we deem necessary for us to survive. They just didn't have any part of it. They didn't have any of that. So, and yet they somehow lived and survived, and not just that, but engaged in a war that I honestly, I don't know how Romania did it. I don't know how they had the balls to get involved in the first place, and I don't know how they conquered anything, because you can see here, by a certain time Romania got huge, and even here during the World War II they just took such a big part of Bessarabia and what's now known as Republic of Moldova and Transnistria, and it's just mind-blowing, honestly. So yeah, this is the story of a boy that grew up in this crazy world, in a world that started World War III when he was like 4 years old, and it only got worse and worse as time got by, because in the 1940s Romania suffers a major blow, and I can't wait for us to talk about a bunch of stuff that happens during the World War II. So next time we're gonna cover like the first part, like 1940 to 1943, and then we're gonna cover like 1944, 1945, and then we're gonna cover what happens after, I think, or something like that. Kind of, that's the plan, sort of. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting to think about it. That's what I think. This is why I wanted to do this, and I'd like to show you more, but as you saw, it doesn't quite cooperate with me. This tiny nasty little thing that's called a laptop, but I think I can show you a little bit more of like the Romanian peasant, basically. So, you know, just kind of a bit of context of how life was lived during that period, because you know, uh, while we had planes and we had bunch of different stuff that was quite seen as quite modern, um, we were quite behind in some aspects. As you can see here, we had skiing, which is, you know, interesting considering that Romania barely has any sort of like winter sport, honestly. And yeah, this is the type of rural area he grew up in. Of course, this isn't the exact place, but as you can see, the water wasn't running in their house. It was in the garden or in the center of the town. This is what teenage girls would do. They would sit on a bench and just do crafts, basically, you know. What you look for like a hobby now, they were doing that for, you know, not to die of boredom, basically. And this is quite a very nice representation, though it lacks a certain reality in the fact that Romanians, well, ever since forever, even from the time of the Dacians, were big wine drinkers and drinkers in general. So you don't see here a lot of stuff that would happen, like wife beating, rape, killings, random killings, you know, stuff like that. As nice as all these are, those things would happen, and they still happen. Like at some point, there was a joke here in Romania, like it's our little inside joke, where the 5 o'clock news would all be drunk guys fucking their 80-year-old grandmas and after killing them with like a hammer or an axe. No, so it's interesting. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. Here's where Romania went at an international exposition in New York City, and we actually took part in this place, which is in this World Fair, which is quite interesting to me, seeing how it's such an interesting thing to see that our international relationships at that time were very very strong, and if maybe we had chosen more wisely, and instead of going with the Nazis, we would have, you know, stuck with the Allies, or would have stayed neutral, it would have been something different of a like destiny for this country, so to speak. But yeah, it's part of history, and it's something very cute from my perspective to see this, because now we barely have any presence, especially in the United States fair and stuff like that. So this is kind of it. This is the episode for today, and I can't wait to talk to you next week at the same time. And it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be quite a series, and I know I didn't touch this too much. No, I didn't. But stick with me. There's much more. You can take this as the kind of the context of where it all starts and where we're going, because I think it's interesting, and I think it kind of merits to put Romania into perspective, because not many know the history of Romania and where we were and where we're going. So now you kind of know where the journey starts and what's happening, and then you're gonna find out more about my grandfather's life, and not just that, but the Romanian history in general. I have a bunch of stuff prepared for the next few weeks, which is awesome, and I can't believe I found so many things. So it's fun for both of us, you listening and learning something, me discovering as well a lot of stuff that I didn't know about Romania. So I want to thank you if you're listening on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, or wherever else you can find podcasts. Thank you. If you watch live, thank you as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I'm gonna put an end card at this, but not now, after in the editing. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye bye.